Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Israeli authorities crack down on virus restriction violations as the health ministry records a slight spike in COVID infections. The Palestinian Authority, meanwhile, looks to reconnect with the United States, just not through President Trump. And finally, forget autumn. The summer heat makes way for winter this week, which brings flooding in the south along with it. The 8-ball has been shaken and outlook seems to be good with respect to Israel's ongoing battle against the coronavirus. The health ministry reporting that there are under 10,000 active cases in the country now for the first time since early July. Current infection numbers in Israel getting better and better every day. Just 9,762 coronavirus patients being reported Sunday night. And this as the Israel Institute for Biological Research begins its first human trials for a COVID-19 vaccine. Also, select businesses and classrooms in Israel are reopening their doors, while Health Minister Yuli Edelstein unveils a new pilot program to shorten the duration of virus quarantines from 14 days to 12 days. And more restrictions may be eased soon as the cabinet meets on Monday to discuss. But the IDF Coronavirus Task Force is now worried that our progress against the pandemic may be over. The overnight infection rate growing again from under 2% to over 3%. Possibly as an early effect of the lockdown exit strategy initiated late last month. At least 394 people are now in serious condition as well, 172 of whom are on ventilators, and the death toll rising by 5 overnight to 2,569. Then meanwhile, many are still violating the existing restrictions too, including at least 12,000 Muslim worshippers who packed into the Temple Mount last Friday. Thousands of Israelis who crowded the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem during ongoing weekend protests, and yet even more thousands of ultra-Orthodox Israelis who are vowing to continue ignoring restrictions on prayer and Torah study. Trying to get ahead of the third wave, then, Israeli officials on Sunday approved a draft bill that would significantly raise fines for breaking coronavirus regulations. For example, if passed, illegally opening a school, event hall, conference, or even a party could be punishable by a 20,000 shekel or nearly $6,000 fine, 4 times the current punishment. Then likewise, if passed, illegally opening a business to the public would be fined by up to 10,000 shekels, as opposed to half that. Meantime, just as Prime Minister Netanyahu has been saying as Israel works towards exiting COVID-19 lockdowns, the rest of the world seems dead set to re-enter them. Europe alone, for example, is now reporting over 1.6 million new coronavirus infections in just the past 7 days. Hannah Rifkin reporting.
אתם ראיתם שבוריס ג'ונסון הכריז אתמול סגר על אנגליה, מקרון קודם לכן צרפת, בלגיה, צ'כיה, הולנד ומדינות רבות אחרות. כמעט כל אירופה עכשיו נכנסת לסגר כזה או אחר. ובכן, בשעה שאנחנו יוצאים, הם נכנסים ואנחנו נאחל לכולם הצלחה.
One after another, the nations of Europe are announcing massive spikes in infection and a return to coronavirus lockdowns, starting with Germany, France, and the UK. Active COVID cases on the continent having doubled in the last 5 weeks alone, now totaling over half of the 3.3 million active worldwide cases, and the speed of the infection is frightening too. The latest 5 million cases in Europe recorded in just over a month, as opposed to the first 5 million cases that took over 9 months to accumulate. Meanwhile, both Latin America and Asia reached a total of over 10 million infected in October. And the United States, just days ahead of the 2020 presidential election, is reporting over 9 million citizens and counting as having been sick, with over 250,000 Americans reportedly killed by the virus.
Speaking of the United States elections, Democratic nominee, former Vice President Joe Biden, and incumbent Republican President Donald Trump are in the final leg of their 2020 campaigns. But as they say, it ain't over till it's over, leaving the rest of the world, and especially the Middle East, on pins and needles, waiting for the results. Already making their preference clear, though, is the Palestinian Authority, which is reportedly in direct contact now with the Joe Biden camp. 2 Palestinian Authority officials speaking on condition of anonymity, saying that a Palestinian-American businessman had helped establish the contact between them. And one of the officials is explaining that having a dialogue with the Democratic candidate is important to the Palestinian leadership. Not too surprising, though, that there's no love lost between Ramallah and the Trump administration. Palestinian Authority officials consistently condemning Trump's policies as biased in Israel's favor. Trump's accomplishments in the Middle East, now including the Israel-Palestinian Peace to Prosperity outline, the recognition of Jerusalem and the Golan as Israel proper, the moving of the United States Embassy to Jerusalem in kind, and most recently, the brokering of 3 historic peace agreements between Israel and Arab states, the UAE, Bahrain, and Sudan, all of which the Palestinian Authority has rebuked. Well, joining me now with more is former ambassador in Washington and expert on United States-Israel relations and the Middle East, Yoram Ettinger. Yoram, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, Ambassador, will a Biden administration have the same approach to Obama's with respect to the Middle East?
Well, it could go even towards a more radical policy, at least based on the advisors surrounding Vice President Biden. And one reminder is that both Biden and his advisors warned that the recognition of Jerusalem as capital of Israel would be a blow to the peace process. The same attitude has been exhibited towards the aid to the Palestinians. The current administration has curtailed almost the entire foreign aid to the Palestinian Authority due to their demand that the Palestinians desist from subsidizing on a monthly basis families of terrorists. The Biden policy has been to renew the foreign aid to the Palestinian Authority, irrespective of the monthly allowances to families of terrorists. The Trump administration stopped altogether foreign aid to UNRWA. And the reason has been that U.S. does not wish to subsidize a UN agency which perpetuates rather than solves refugee problem, and an agency, UNRWA, which underlines or finances hate education. The advisors of Vice President Biden have stated their interest to renew foreign aid to UNRWA. And certainly, the Biden worldview, the advisors around Biden do believe that the Palestinian issue is a core cause of the Arab-Israeli conflict, a crown jewel of Arab policymakers, a major cause of Middle East turbulence, none of which has anything to do with reality, but certainly should Vice President Biden win the election, I assume that we will see renewal of that policy, which yielded no progress towards peace.
Beyond yielding, no results, do you think that change in policy might undo some of the arguably positive results of the Trump administration in the Middle East?
Well, possibly the freezing of the current peace momentum. There are 4 or 5 additional Arab and Muslim countries in the Middle East, in North Africa, in the sub-Sahara part of Africa, which consider joining the peace process with Israel, but they await because they suspect that a Biden administration may not support such a move, while the threat to their own regime would be intensified. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Sudan joined the peace process with Israel under the assumption that the U.S. would stand up to Iran rather than embrace the Ayatollahs of Iran. And certainly the same thing with regard to the Muslim Brotherhood, the largest Muslim terror organization, which the Obama-Biden administration embraced and courted, contrary to the current administration, which supports Jordan and Egypt and the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Bahrain's fight against Muslim Brotherhood terrorism.
Well, I think it'll be very interesting to see how all of this plays out ahead of the election, especially as, you know, a lot of the media in the United States is largely ignoring, you know, some of the peace agreements or the progress made in the wake of the Abraham Peace Accords. But Ambassador Ettinger, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
In other news, the Palestinian Authority is appearing to want to eat their cake and have it too, as they're simultaneously speaking with the Biden camp in hopes of President Trump's ousting while resuming the acceptance of tax money collected by Israel. And now Israel has collected billions of shekels in taxes on behalf of the Palestinian Authority. And this accounts for a massive chunk of the PA's annual GDP. But the PA has long been refusing to accept any of it until now, preferring instead to slip closer and closer towards economic collapse. This in part as a supposed protest against Israel's deduction of funds from these taxes, deductions equal to the amount that the PA pays terrorists in monthly stipends. Then the PA doubled down on this position earlier this year in the wake of American support for this and support for Jerusalem, and now the scrapped Israeli plans to annex portions of the West Bank. But at any rate, we'll see whether the reports are true or not come December, as some in Ramallah are saying that the policy change will take effect at the end of the month, while others are denying the shift in position altogether. So we know now that the Palestinian preference is towards Joe Biden, but the Jewish vote, on the other hand, is a bit more divided. Polls continuing to show Jewish voters in the United States as overwhelmingly in support of Joe Biden, while American Israeli Jews are still overwhelmingly supporting President Trump. And one such supporter joins us now. Please welcome businessman and founder of Israelis for Trump, Joe Zavuloni. Joe, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, and blessings for another 4 great years, hopefully tomorrow.
All right, well, so what are the issues most important to you in this election then?
Well, there are many issues, but first of all, you know, the Palestinian Authority, of course, is very excited about, you know, the scenario that possibly somehow Joe Biden will become the next president, but they're not the only ones. You know, they're obviously very happy because finally they can have more funds now to support terrorist families like they have been doing with U.S. aid. And that is despicable, it's reprehensible, and should not be tolerated. But they're not the only ones excited, Aaron, I must tell you. The Ayatollahs in Iran can't wait for Biden to come back and become now a president where he was vice president. They missed $150 billion that the Obama administration funded them with. They missed the $1.8 billion in cash that was dropped over to them. Look, Joe Biden not only sold America to China, and everybody knows that, and to Ukraine and whoever, you know, has the highest bid, but he's going to turn this country, the United States, into a socialist country. I'm not just saying that. If you take a look at the stream from the radical left that is taking over the Democratic Party, you have, you know, Congresswoman AOC, along with Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar. They are the driving force behind the Democratic agenda today. They want to turn this country, this great country, into a socialist country. This is why they are not going to win. This is why the Latinos here in America are overwhelmingly today support President Trump. I don't believe the polls. I don't believe what the media is telling us. I see it on the streets. And as you can see, I mean, I founded a movement called Israelis for Trump. President Trump has been the greatest friend to Israel ever recorded in history of this country and in the history of the Jewish nation. He not only recognized Jerusalem as the eternal capital of the Jewish nation and the capital of the state of Israel, he also recognized the Golan Heights as a strategic, undivided part of Israel. He also done away with the Palestinian aid, which is used for terrorist activities. And for that, I am prioritizing my vote for our president.
Well, so Joe, you know, so I understand, of course, your point of view that you're bringing to us right now. So why do you think that there's such a division then between the Israeli Jewish voter and the American Jewish voter?
Look, I don't think there's a division. I think
a difference of opinion, rather, you could say.
Well, I don't. Well, let's talk tachlis. Let's talk the truth here, okay? The media is not going to report to you exactly what's going on the street. I see what goes on the street because I engage with people. I speak to people, both Jews, Christians, Latinos, women, LGBT, And there is a very, very big movement to leave the Democratic Party and join President Trump, because they also see the anti-Semitic attacks in this country. They're not coming from the right, they are coming from the left. Take a look at Antifa. Take a look at all the riots and everything else, burning down cities. What cities are those? Those are Democratic-ran cities. Those I don't call them protesters, they're rioters, they're lawbreakers, they're criminals. Some of them are even terrorists. Even President Trump labeled Antifa as a terrorist organization. Those same radicals are the same ones supporting Joe Biden. So a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for the radical left, is a vote for terrorists, is a vote for radical mayhem that is going to be caused in this country. I say,
so Joe, I have to ask you, how did you...
America is more like 50-50.
So I have to ask, how did you, an Israeli American, become so involved to the point that you've started this Israelis for Trump movement?
I have been so sick and tired of the crucifixion and the unbelievable and unacceptable persecution of this president, of this great president. For 3.5 years, the media has been saturated with Russia, Russia, Russia. The Russian hoax based on a fake dossier paid for by the Clinton campaign. No one, even after his name was cleared through the U.S. Senate, came back and said, you know what, Mr. Trump, Mr. President, we apologize. Nobody did that. So I wanted to make sure that our community stands up with the president that is real for America, that is the best friend America ever had, the best advocate for America. Where Obama apologized for America, Donald Trump stands up for America.
All right, well,
Donald Trump stands up for our veterans, for our military, for our police. And that is the right way as a Jew, as an American citizen, as a father, as a businessman. That is the right choice, is to vote for Donald Trump.
All right, Joe Zavalloni, strong words ahead of Election Day. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. God bless for another 4 great years. Trump 2020.
All right, moving on. Life events during the pandemic have dramatically evolved to keep in line with travel and lockdown restrictions. But for secular or less than ultra-Orthodox Israeli couples who want to avoid going through the rabbinate authorities, the situation is that much more difficult. Lucky for them, though, Norway is here to help, as the European nation is now offering to conduct marriage registrations for Israelis out of its Tel Aviv embassy location. The only thing that's still needed is the Interior Affairs and Justice Ministry's sign-off. And really, that's just a formality, too. Now, normally, Israel does not provide any options for civil marriages or unions, so couples who want to register as married outside the rabbinate must leave the state entirely, marry, and return with a recognized license. Popular destinations, including nearby Cyprus, as it's just a quick and cheap flight away. But with COVID restrictions in place, Israelis are finding this process to be increasingly complicated, if not impossible. So with the coordination of the Knesset Internal Affairs Committee Chair, MK Miki Chaimovich, Norway is opening its embassy in Israel for nuptial ceremonies. On a related note, subjectively offensive or controversial rhetoric is on the back foot. But what does that mean for the state of public discourse in today's world? And how did we get here? Journalist, filmmaker, and director of the new documentary Blasphemy, Martin Himmel, joins me to discuss. Martin, I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you.
Well, sure.
All right, now, I have to ask, first of all, how did we get to where we are in terms of the level of public discourse or the lack thereof?
Well, I think it's a direct function of the very combative atmosphere that exists in politics today. If you look especially in American politics, there's a tremendous combative atmosphere between Republicans and Democrats, between right and left. And that combative atmosphere has led to a real retrenchment. And therefore, you see right-wing fascist elements and left-wing Bolshevist sort of elements talking these days. And neither are any very tolerant of the other.
Well, and today we're seeing, a manifestation of this commonly referred to as cancel culture. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, basically in our documentary, we explore cancel culture is almost like a blasphemy. Why a blasphemy? I mean, it's not religion, but in religion there are certain basic tenets, there are certain basic rules. For instance, in the medieval ages, Copernicus was burned at the stake for saying that the world went around the sun. Galileo spent 20 years in prison in his home because he advocated something similar to that. Yet he discovered the moons around Jupiter. And today what we have in social life is we see a sort of a blasphemy as well. So, for example, in many LGBTQ movements, especially when it comes to transsexuals, etc., there are certain words that you can't go over anymore. For instance, if you took very famous lesbian activists like Martina Navratilova in the 70s suffered terribly for what she did. She was a tennis champion fighting for women's rights. Now she says that transgenders who go from male to female have an unfair advantage in sports. That's blasphemy. You say that, that's considered hate speech. That's like equivalent to saying the Holocaust didn't happen or something like that. And she therefore is being canceled for something like that. So there's many examples of that as well. For instance, in Me Too, if the Me Too movement, if a woman particularly says that she's been sexually assaulted, and she might very well have been sexually assaulted, it's not an issue if the issue is that you must accept the stance immediately. It can't be questioned in any way, shape, or form. If you do not accept it immediately, then basically if you're male, you're a misogynist, or you hate women, or you're not for women's rights. And many people have been canceled. They've been shut out of social media. They've been shut out of Twitter. They've been
social pariahs in many cases.
Basically, yes. And they've been shut out of the world around them.
So, how is this affecting politics, especially, again, within the context of the 2020 election in the United States?
Well, basically, you're not allowed to express your opinion. If you express it, it can have tremendous implications. Both ways, by the way. Sure. You can have it both ways. If you're in New York and you say, well, Donald Trump might be not exactly the man I want, but he's got some positive aspects when it came to the economy or something like that, you could be crucified for that. You could be attacked for that. Similarly, if you're coming from a place like Miami and you go to the Latino area and say, well, I think that Donald Trump is a right-wing lunatic and I will not take him, you could be attacked there as well because that means you're pro-Castro. Wow.
It seems to me that there's just this degradation of the gray area, of nuance, of the understanding that people and things are not monolithic.
Precisely. Yeah, well, truth is gray. Right. Truth is contradictory. There's no such thing as clear-cut truth. When people see the truth as clear-cut, that's a form of dogma. That's a tenet. That's a form of, that's also saying that if you do not adhere completely to that clear-cut dogmatic truth, then you're a blasphemer, then you're a traitor, then maybe you're a criminal. And that's the danger point that we're seeing, especially in the United States.
All right, well, I sincerely hope that we find some way to address this effectively in the very near future. Martin, thank you very much for being with us today. Moving on, winter is here in Israel, and as usual, it arrives right on the heels of summer with no distinct autumn weather to speak of. Unfortunately, though, this presents itself as one of Mother Nature's wild mood swings, complete with heavy rains and injuries in the south. Thunderstorms and fierce hail reported in the southern Arava region of Israel, leading to 4 hikers in Eilat needing rescue Sunday evening. The Israeli electric Thunderstorms and fierce hail reported in the southern Arava region of Israel, leading to 4 hikers in Eilat needing rescue Sunday evening. The Israeli electric company, meanwhile, is telling patrons to brace for blackouts and power fluctuations as drivers are warned to watch for road closures and flash flooding. But of course, that's not all. Temperatures in Israel expected to plummet over the next few days, with rain and severe weather predicted to intensify through to the weekend. With last year's intense winter weather in mind, then, in which 7 people were killed by flooding-related incidents, the public is advised to exercise extreme caution, especially as it's unknown how much progress has been made in government-approved plans to upgrade drainage infrastructure. And with that, let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight and tomorrow, you can expect a slight drop in temperatures, but with mostly clear to partly cloudy skies. The low tonight set to fall to about 63 Fahrenheit or 17 degrees Celsius, while the high tomorrow is expected to be around 76 Fahrenheit or 24 degrees Celsius. And now, before we go, of course, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. Wow, what a great mashup. That's fantastic. Short, sweet, but still awesome. All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.41 shekels to the American dollar and 2.57 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And for more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV channels. I'm Aaron Forrest. Thank you so much for watching.